If you lose your passport here, you are effectively a stateless person. There are no embassies or consulates, there is no one to complain to, because this place doesn't exist. If you are a local with some sense, you have at least one more passport, preferably two. If you have enough sense, you left this place a long time ago, like half of the population already did. If you're too young to have ever been to the Soviet Union, a visit here may show you some things, such as state-of-the-art, recently renovated and very well-maintained Soviet monuments, hammers and sickles everywhere, including on the so-called national flag, Lada and Moskvich Militsiya cars, a supreme Soviet that is still called like that today, and plenty of non-Russians LARPing as Russians. This place has them all. Oh, and just like the USSR, no picture. Even touristy areas are subjected to draconian videotaping and photography restrictions. This place LARPs as a country, and it's more or less owned by a corporation called Sheriff. Everything here is Sheriff. The local phone company, all of the supermarkets worth entering into, all currency exchanges, even the local football squad. This season, the European champions, Real Madrid, lost 4 times for the whole season, against Chelsea, Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain and Sheriff Tiraspol. What's not owned by Sheriff looks like the 1980s USSR. Empty stores, substandard merch, if there is any, or has already gone bankrupt. Welcome to the Transnistrian Moldovan Republic. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the 7th featured installment of Knowing Moldova. What you're listening to right now is the official anthem of the Transnistrian Moldovan Republic. If it sounds North Korean-ish, that's because Transnistria routinely has North Korean vibes. The hammer and sickle is unironically on the flag, Bolshevik monuments are the absolute norm in its cities, and the streets are empty. This is Bendir, or Tighina. For hundreds of years, a city at the intersection of empires, just like now, and a city of commerce. The Soviets turned it into a city of industry and commerce. Today, however, it looks more like Pyongyang. Except there might be more people on the streets of Pyongyang in the middle of the summer in a workday than there are in Bendir. Videotaping in Transnistria is severely restricted. Every time I would pull up the GoPro, a militia car would show up and slow down right next to me. It would go away as soon as I would put the GoPro away. That's not as harsh as North Korea, but not far off either. 2 days before, when we tried to get into Transnistria, the Russian army asked to see our memory cards on which we had most of the footage used in the previous episode. Naturally, we said no, but they didn't push it either, unlike North Korea, where they would have. The restriction on videotaping is maintained easily also due to the fact that the locals don't seem to have recording devices either. While visiting this citadel, a local woman asked me to take a picture of her and her friends. I indulged the request simply because she handed me a photo camera of the kind that used to be popular in Romania about 15 or even 20 years ago. Digital, all right, but on the low-end spec and hardly something you'd expect to see used unironically in 2021 Europe. Then I looked at other people taking pictures. All in the same category, very old photo cameras, no video of any kind. The only ones using more modern and professional photo cameras were people wearing badges showing they've got official permission from the separatist government, which you can't really get if you're Romanian. I mean, especially if you're Romanian. You will notice that the anthem is in the Romanian language. Of course, there is a version in Russian as well. That's because officially Transnistria has at least two official languages, Russian and quote-unquote Moldovan. And while in the rest of Moldova the idea of Moldovan language isn't taken seriously anymore even by most of the pro-Russians, here in the separatist territory it is. If you remember from the previous episodes, one of the reasons invoked for this whole separatism thingy was the 1989 decree of the Supreme Soviet of SSR Moldova that abolished the Russian alphabet for the Romanian language and reintroduced proper Latin writing for the dominant language. Well, here, in Transnistria, that never applied. To this day, writing in Romanian, albeit rarely seen, is in Cyrillic, if permitted at all. If you're too young to have seen this in the 1970s or 1980s in the eastern part of Romania, where we would tune in to Soviet TV for football matches mostly, namely content that is in Romanian-ish but in Cyrillic and with wild language, you can watch hours and hours of such content now on YouTube. The Transnistrian state authorities have been very keen on publishing quite a bit of it on YouTube, given that they couldn't have broadcasted it otherwise outside of their so-called borders, because, you see, you kinda need to be a company from a country that actually exists in order to broadcast via satellite. Now, with the risk of getting a copyright strike from the Transnistrian government, I want to show you 4 clips throughout this episode from the Transnistrian news in Romanian, or as they call it, știrile în limba moldovenească. 2 clips are from 8 years ago and 2 from this month. Now, those of you who don't speak Romanian may not fully appreciate the writing, but please do pay attention to the content, as I shall include subtitles in English. Here's one from March the 21st, 2014.
La ordinara sesiune a Sovietului Raional de Deputați Camenca au fost făcute totalurile activității administrației raionale și a aleșilor poporului în 2013. În general, lucrul puterii executive și cele legislative din teritoriu a fost apreciat satisfăcător.
Anul trecut, în condițiile funcționării unui mecanism temporar de finanțare, au fost atinse rezultate pozitive în diverse sfere de activitate, a relatat conducătorul raionului. Comparativ cu 2012, suma propriilor venituri s-a majorat cu circa 22%. Aceasta a fost posibil și grație activității ritmice a uzinei de conserve din oraș. După trecerea în proprietate de stat, la întreprindere, întreit s-a majorat volumul de producere. Drept rezultat, de circa 5 ori s-au mărit plățile achitate în buget, dar principala direcție de activitate rămâne să fie agricultura.
Посевная площадь в 2013 году составила 17.
În raion sunt cultivate circa 17.000 de hectare. De tot au fost strânse mai mult de 41.000 tone de cereale cu recoltă medie de 42 centnere la hectar. Este unul din cele mai bune rezultate din Republică. Privind recolta florii soarelui, a porumbului și a rapiței de toamnă, camencenii de asemenea s-au plasat pe locul întâi. Și în sfera socială anul trecut s-au atins rezultate pozitive. Grație ajutorului umanitar acordat de Rusia, au fost îmbunătățite condițiile de întreținere a preșcolarilor din 4 grădinițe de copii din raion. Eforturile comune sunt îndreptate la soluționarea problemelor existente în teritoriu. Realizarea poruncilor alegătorilor, ce țin de reparația drumurilor și a fondului locativ, de gazificarea obiectelor sociale la sat, este dificilă din cauza finanțării reduse. Aleșii poporului, în unanimitate, au aprobat darea de seamă a președintelui Sovietului Raional, iar activității puterii executive din raion i-a fost dată o apreciere satisfăcătoare.
Now, you don't see that anywhere else, perhaps with the possible exception of North Korea. In Transnistria, the institutions are still called the Soviet, and the LARPing as a transparent governance continues to keep the language of the old Soviet Union. But more important in the snippet that I've just shown you is the mentioning of Russia's help in rehabilitating a kindergarten. Now, of course, nothing inherently wrong with that, but that is how the pro-Russian sentiment was maintained here throughout the decades after the so-called independence. Any investment from the West, mostly Moldova and Romania really, was either never acknowledged or outright denied, while any Russian fart made quote-unquote national news here. Rinse and repeat for over 30 years. For instance, they also talk in this old report about the increase in activity of the canned food plant. Well, who do they sell that to? The answer is Romania, Germany, and Italy, in this order. In fact, over the last 5 years, Romania is not just the biggest economic partner, but it routinely represents the majority of all trade that the so-called Transnistrian Moldovan Republic makes. Russia doesn't even make it into the top 5. Yet on the streets of Tiraspol and Bendir, you see the Russian flag more often than the Transnistrian one. And of course, you never see the flag of Moldova, even though the entire industry of Transnistria in fact operates as companies registered in Moldova in order to be able to conduct export. If there's a way to summarize Transnistria, it would be this way: a mixed or ethnically diverse group of people under the boot of an all-encompassing oligarchy that LARPs as Russians and are willingly or unwillingly acting as a bridgehead for Russia's geopolitical power plays in the region. And this was never really a secret. Here's another snippet from the same newsreel from March 21st, 2014.
În interviul acordat canalului rus de televiziune, Rogozin a remarcat: în Nistrenia locuiesc în jurul la 200.000 de cetățeni ai Rusiei. Potrivit vicepremierului Rusiei, ar putut fi și mai mulți dacă Moldova ar fi permis să fie deschis consulat general la Tiraspol.
Toți în suflet sunt conaționali, sunt oamenii noștri, parte a lumii ruse, fără îndoială.
Dmitri Rogozin a povestit despre ajutorul pe care Rusia îl acordă Nistreniei pe linia Organizației Autonome Necomerciale Integrarea Euroasiatică. Dmitri Rogozin încă o dată a confirmat că poziția Rusiei privind Nistrenia va depinde de situația geopolitică reală în regiune.
Конечно, мы гаранты приднестровского регулирования.
Noi suntem garanții reglementării Nistrenia, trebuie să fim obiectivi, trebuie să susținem toate formatele internaționale ale negocierilor. Între timp vom reieși din realități, iar ele sunt de așa natură. Dacă Chișinăul va merge în Bruxelles, Uniunea Europeană și NATO, Nistrenia precis că nu va merge încolo.
Here's that term again, the Russian world, Ruski mir. You've seen a lot of that term more recently in the Western media as well. But this was recorded in March 2014, when the war in Ukraine had just begun and continues to this day. Unlike 2014, however, the region is now poorer, relatively speaking, less free to the extent that you can talk about freedom in a place like this, and more depressed. In 2014, videotaping wasn't the problem, and even questioning the regime was, at the very least, tolerated. They would LARP as Soviets on TV, but the place really isn't communist. And in 2014, it wasn't that repressive either. Again, comparatively speaking to both present day and early 1990s. Of course, as always, the reasons were economical. You can't really hope to access the markets of the surrounding countries, all of them with a better track record on freedoms than Transnistria, while you keep jailing everyone. With that said, over time, most of its advantages have waned, and thus more and more people permanently left the place. Aside from the obvious disadvantages, there are also some perks to being a separatist, unrecognized country. Places like the Turkish Republic of the Northern Cyprus thrive off those perks by having open tourism, top-tier universities that attract international students, low taxes, many casinos, free flow of capital, friendly banks, and so on. But the TRNC is built on a capitalist foundation and has the advantage of geography, being located on an island that tourists love and with a great climate, that is. Pridnestrovia, on the other hand, doesn't have the advantage of geography. If anything, it's precisely geography that works against it, and while not explicitly communist, it is built upon a Soviet mentality in which the state is in all and everything. So, the natural perks that come with being an unrecognized country got gradually lost. In early 2010s, Pridnestrovia would exploit the lack of copyright, but the creation of a state ISP killed the initiative. They used to mine Bitcoin until recently, but state control over the electricity tanked the cash cow. By the way, for crypto fans, by using crypto, you're basically financing most of these regimes. Low taxation on some goods, such as electronics, used to also bring a lot of commerce here, but as Sherif gradually took over all of the commerce, that trade also went out on the window. It used to be the case that a laptop here, for instance, would cost 20 or even 30% less than in Chisinau, which is just 70 kilometers from here. So poorer people would be able to keep up by taking a bus here and in the process enriching the regime too. But the combination of economic mismanagement, aggressive Russification policies, which left many people monolingual in a region where that's an explicit handicap, and the geopolitical context, since 2014 now Russia is cashing in from its investment in this bridgehead fortress, all of these have made Transnistria unlivable. That's how it can easily be explained why the streets are empty, because nobody lives here. Officially, 470,000 people live in the so-called Transnistrian Moldovan Republic. On the other side of the Dniester, in Chisinau, the estimate from January 2022 says that about 350,000 people live here. From Chisinau's perspective, this place is called the Administrative Territorial Unit Left of Dniester, UAT Stânga Nistrului, and that designation doesn't differentiate between places left of Dniester controlled by Moldova and places controlled by the separatists. However, I will say that even the Moldovan estimate is probably optimistic. This is Tiraspol, the de facto capital, in the afternoon. Officially, the capital city has 130,000 inhabitants. Now, I'm sorry, but I just don't believe that. There are more people on the streets in a workday in Uzhgorod, Ukraine, which is not a capital city and has a population theoretically smaller than Tiraspol. Even now, with the war, there is more vibrant life in Uzhgorod than it is in Tiraspol during peacetime. Of the people you meet on the street, very few of them are civilians to begin with. Almost everyone, especially every man you meet, is somehow involved with the regime, routinely in the never-ending security apparatus. There are at least 3,000 Russian military men here, and then there are at least 8,000 quote-unquote local military men. And that's just active personnel. Then there are thousands more working in the Militsiya, which is the Soviet name for the police, as well as the men working in the unmarked security units, which you will for sure encounter should you choose to engage in tourism here. It's not like in North Korea, where you are officially given a handler who tells you what you can and can't do, but more like back in the days of communist Romania, where a small team between 2 to 5 people are tasked to tracking all of your moves and only intervene in extreme situations. Now, what constitutes an extreme situation? Well, taking a picture of the Supreme Soviet, for instance, or engaging the locals too much, which is a nice way of saying don't talk politics excessively with the locals. The restriction on videotaping, quite frankly, didn't bother me that much. I have plenty of older footage that I can use for this video, but the aggressive enforcement on engaging the locals was quite a bummer. Admittedly, it's not very difficult to work around it, but still, it is a clue into the regime's mentality. Speaking of the regime's mentality, the official propaganda of the regime has changed quite a lot in the last 8 years. They no longer talk that much about investments, because there isn't much anyway, and the geopolitical issues are no longer covered in a passive way with a pro-Russian slant. Now, the first Pridnestrovian channel is full hysterical. Here's a clip from June the 3rd, 2022.
Молдова без российских новостей. Теперь в соседней стране нельзя ретранслировать программы информационно-аналитического, военного и политического содержания из России. Накануне молдавский парламент принял закон во втором чтении. Документ отправили президенту Санду на подпись. В Молдове говорят, это фактически закон о цензуре. Свободы слова нет, все меньше в Молдове и исторической памяти. Полиция оштрафовала уже более 200 человек за ношение георгиевской ленты во время шествий 9 мая. Общая сумма штрафов почти 30 000 евро.
Wow, that sounds horrible. Except this is a measure that has been in effect since 2018. I looked it up, nobody protested then. In fact, the new boss of the region would do friendly visits to Chisinau even as this measure had been in effect. The measure was suspended in 2020 and now it's being reapplied. And it's not against Russian media per se, but rather it bans political, military and analysis shows from TV stations operating from countries that did not ratify the European Convention on Transfrontier Television. Now what's that? Well, it's a treaty that says the signatories allow the free flow of broadcasting between them. Russia, Denmark, Belgium, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, the Netherlands, Sweden or Ireland are among the countries that did not sign or ratify this treaty. The Moldovan measure doesn't ban Russian entertainment or other forms of Russian media content that is not political or military. So while you can frame this as censorship, the first Pridnestrovian television somehow forgot to mention that even many Russian media outlets located in Russia are in fact banned in Russia. You can't have it both ways. Well, you can, but that only in the parallel universe that Transnistria is. Also, please notice the sharp increase in video quality of the official propaganda, much better than 8 years ago for sure. And while we're at the official propaganda, let me show you how the rest of Moldova is portrayed here in the present day. Here's another clip, also from June 3rd, 2022.
Bine v-am găsit, e ora știrilor în limba moldovenească. Noi continuăm să vă aducem la cunoștință principalele evenimente din Republică. Cum a fost această zi și prin ce se va memoriza ea, despre aceasta povestim chiar acum. Moldova a distrus mecanismul dialogului cu Nistrenia. Negocierile sunt în impas. Despre aceasta a povestit șeful Ministerului Nistrean de Externe, Vitalie Ignatiev, în emisia canalului televizat Rusia 24. Au vorbit despre pacificare, la fel și despre relațiile Moldovei cu România. În școlile statului vecin de mult studiază istoria românilor și limba română. Tot mai mulți oameni sunt cetățeni ai României. Moldova, într-adevăr, nu știe ce e de făcut în relațiile cu Nistrenia. Ea, într-adevăr, dorește să se integreze la maximum cu România și, după cum se vede, apare o nouă realitate obiectivă, care ne vorbește despre faptul că e necesar a recunoaște de iure ceea ce de facto există deja, și anume suveranitatea Nistreniei, care există mai bine de 30 de ani. Chișinăul creează noi probleme în relațiile cu Nistrenia. Blocarea furnizărilor, întrebarea bancară, dosarele penale, numerele neutre. Între timp, Moldova e sub dirijarea externă și controlul vestului, spune Vitalie Ignatiev. Vecinii se apropie de NATO, așteaptă ajutor militar, armament de la SUA și Marea Britanie.
So, notice that Russia 24 is the main source to be quoted and the usual tropes. And the rest of Moldova is referred to as the neighboring state. Also, American man bad, British man bad. The obsession with Anglo-Americans never really stopped here, even though the rest of Moldova has been run by an outright pro-Russian chap coordinated with the Kremlin until basically December 2020. It's hardly Western control, methinks. But the regime here simply cannot accept, even though it knows it to be true, that even most of the voters of the communists in fact do prefer Romanian as a language and written properly, not like this, and they prefer general economic integration westwards. Heck, even Transnistria does that too, minus the language part, since, again, most of their trade is with Romania and the remainder is divided between Italy, Germany and Turkey. So, yeah, this is how Transnistria functions. Soviet visuals, hysterical geopolitics, trade almost exclusively with those they deem as the enemy, Russian militarism, but without the perks, as Russia doesn't recognize Transnistria at all, oligarchic regime, and a bunch of mostly poor people caught in between who can't afford to leave. Oh, speaking of leaving, having 3 passports is very common here, even if you don't intend to move out. The simple fact of life is that Transnistria is small and almost anything you may need is 1 or 2 border crossings away. The escalation of the war in Ukraine in late February has made quite a few locals take new trips to Moldova to get their Moldovan papers in order. You know, just in case. For the first 2 months of the so-called special operation, quite a lot of people crowded the so-called border crossing here in Varnica to get their passports, birth certificates and even property deeds in order, and many of them never returned. Day-to-day life in Transnistria is harsh. Very harsh even by Moldova standards, which is already the poorest country in Europe. Some of the things I've seen in these suburbs, which I'm not sure the dashcam properly captured, rather remind me of the late 1980s when communism was collapsing but nobody knew and the standard of living was rapidly collapsing. Oh well. In the next episode, we get into the politics of Transnistria, because there is one more question that needs to be answered. Why? Why is this place still in existence? We answered how it came to be in the previous episode, how it works now, but the why is even more fascinating. Spoiler alert, virtually everyone likes the status quo. How's that? Well, that's for the next episode. And with that being said, thank you all for watching, thank you for your continuous and generous financial support, and I'll see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.